The train whistle cut through the scorching California heat like a knife through butter, and Vincent Hayes felt his chest tighten as he watched the iron beast slow to a stop at the San Pedro depot, knowing that in mere moments, his entire life would change forever. Vincent stood on the weathered wooden platform, his worn leather boots planted firmly on the sun-bleached planks. The year was 1882, and San Pedro was a thriving port town where cattle ranchers, merchants, and sailors mingled in an uneasy dance of commerce and survival. At 26 years old, Vincent had carved out a modest life for himself on a small ranch just outside of town, raising horses and cattle on land his father had left him. His hands bore the calluses of honest work, his face weathered by years under the California sun. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and strong, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Pacific. But today, none of that mattered. Today, he was here to meet Winifred Johnson, the mail-order bride he had been corresponding with for 6 months. Vincent had never been a man of many words. Growing up as the youngest of 4 brothers, he had learned early that the loudest voice usually won the argument, so he had simply stopped arguing. Instead, he observed. He listened. He spoke only when his words carried weight, and he had discovered that people leaned in to hear him when he did speak, drawn by the quiet authority in his low, measured tones. He adjusted his best shirt, a crisp white cotton he had pressed himself that morning, and ran a hand through his hair. His heart hammered against his ribs as the train doors began to open, passengers spilling out onto the platform in a cascade of carpetbags and traveling trunks. That was when he noticed the other man. Marcus Collier stood 15 feet away, dressed in his finest clothes, his boots polished to a mirror shine. Vincent knew Marcus from town, a fellow rancher who owned considerably more land than Vincent did. Marcus was the same age as Vincent, but where Vincent was reserved and thoughtful, Marcus was all swagger and confidence. He stood a few inches shorter than Vincent but carried himself as if he were 10 feet tall. His voice, when he spoke, had always been loud and booming, the kind that filled a saloon and demanded attention. And Marcus was holding a letter in his hand. Vincent's stomach dropped. He looked down at his own letter, the one Winifred had sent him with detailed descriptions of herself and her arrival time. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marcus caught Vincent's eye and his jaw tightened. He strode over, his boots thudding against the platform. "Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the depot even at a conversational volume. "Don't tell me you are here for the same reason I am." Vincent met his gaze steadily. "Seems we might be," he replied, his voice barely above a murmur. Even standing just a few feet apart, Marcus had to lean slightly forward to catch his words over the bustle of the arriving passengers. Marcus's face reddened. "This is some kind of mistake. Winifred Johnson is my bride. We have been writing for months." "That makes 2 of us," Vincent said quietly. He pulled his letter from his pocket, unfolding it carefully. 6 months, to be precise. Marcus snatched the letter from Vincent's hand before he could protest, his eyes scanning the words. Vincent watched as the other man's expression shifted from indignation to confusion to anger. "This does not make any sense," Marcus practically shouted, drawing the attention of several nearby travelers. "The marriage broker assured me that everything was arranged. I paid good money for this introduction." "As did I," Vincent said, keeping his voice low and even despite the fury building in his chest. He had saved for months to afford the broker's fee, scrimping on everything from food to new equipment for his ranch. A throat cleared behind them and both men turned. She stood there with her traveling bag clutched in both hands, and Vincent felt the air leave his lungs. Winifred Johnson was perhaps 23 years old, with auburn hair pinned up beneath a simple traveling hat and eyes the color of honey in sunlight. She wore a practical traveling dress of dark blue cotton, dusty from the long journey, but she carried herself with a grace that made Vincent's heart skip. Her face was heart-shaped, with a spattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks that the sun had darkened. But it was her expression that struck him most. She looked simultaneously terrified and determined, like a woman who had burned all her bridges and was committed to crossing a river with no boat. "I could not help but overhear," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you Vincent Hayes and Marcus Collier?" Both men nodded, and Vincent saw Marcus puff up his chest, preparing to launch into an explanation. But Winifred held up a hand, and to Vincent's surprise, Marcus actually fell silent. "I think I understand what has happened," she said, setting down her bag. "The broker must have made a terrible error. I was writing to someone named Vincent, but I also received letters from a Marcus. I thought they were different agencies, different arrangements. I did not realize until just now that both of you were expecting the same woman." Vincent felt his world tilting. "So you wrote to both of us?" Winifred's cheeks flushed pink. "Not intentionally as deception." "The broker said the first arrangement had fallen through, so she connected me with another gentleman. I thought the Vincent correspondence had ended. I had no idea that both arrangements were still active." Marcus found his voice again, loud and filled with false cheer. "Well, there is a simple solution to this predicament. Winifred, you will clearly need to choose which of us you wish to marry. I can tell you right now that I own 300 acres of prime grazing land, I have a house with 6 rooms, and I employ 4 ranch hands. I can provide you with a comfortable life, pretty dresses, and anything your heart desires." His voice echoed across the platform, causing several people to turn and stare. Vincent saw Winifred flinch slightly at the volume, her hand rising unconsciously to her temple, as if the sound pained her. Vincent took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Johnson," he said quietly, and she turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "I cannot offer you as much land or as fine a house, but I can offer you honesty and a partnership. Whatever I have is yours, and I will work every day to make sure you never regret coming here." She stepped closer to hear him better, and he caught the scent of lavender and train smoke. "Could you speak up?" she asked softly. "I said I would do my best to make you happy," Vincent repeated, only slightly louder. "If you will have me." Marcus laughed, a harsh bark of sound. "She cannot even hear you, Hayes. What kind of husband cannot make himself heard in his own home? Winifred, you need a man with presence, someone who can protect you and command respect. I am that man." Winifred looked between them, her expression unreadable. Vincent could see the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of her situation. She had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, only to find herself caught between 2 men she had never met in person. "Gentlemen," she said finally, her voice firmer now, "I have been on a train for 5 days. I am tired, I am dusty, and I am in no condition to make a life-altering decision on a train platform. Surely there is a hotel where I might stay while I consider this situation." "You will stay at the Grand Pacific," Marcus announced immediately. "I will pay for the finest room they have. No bride of mine will sleep in some shabby boarding house." Vincent felt his jaw clench. He could not afford the Grand Pacific, and Marcus knew it. "The Ocean View Hotel is clean and respectable," he said quietly, "and closer to the harbor, so it stays cooler in this heat." Winifred studied him for a long moment, and Vincent felt as though she were peering directly into his soul. "The ocean view sounds lovely," she said finally, "but I will pay for my own room. I still have some money left from my journey." Marcus sputtered, but Winifred had already picked up her bag. "Now, if one of you gentlemen would be so kind as to show me the way, I would be most grateful." Vincent moved to take her bag, and so did Marcus. They both grabbed for it at the same time, their hands colliding over the worn leather handle. For a moment, Vincent thought Marcus might actually start a physical altercation right there on the platform, but Winifred deftly pulled the bag back with surprising strength. "I can carry my own luggage," she said firmly. "I have been doing so for 5 days. I think I can manage another few blocks." She set off down the platform with determined strides, leaving both men standing there stunned. Vincent recovered first, his longer legs carrying him quickly to her side. "At least let me help," he said quietly. "That bag looks heavy." She glanced at him, a small smile playing at her lips. "It is heavy, full of books mostly. I could not bear to leave them behind." "What kind of books?" Vincent asked, genuinely curious. "Everything," she said, warming to the subject. "Poetry, novels, natural philosophy. I taught school back in Pennsylvania before I came here. Reading was my salvation during the long winters." Vincent felt something shift in his chest. A woman who loved books. He had not dared hope for that. His own small house had a shelf of volumes he had accumulated over the years, though he rarely had anyone to discuss them with. Marcus had caught up to them, his boots thudding heavily on the dirt road. "Books are fine for leisure," he boomed, "but out here practical skills matter more. Can you cook, Winifred? Keep a house?" Winifred's expression tightened. "I can do all of those things, Mr. Collier. I am also capable of intelligent conversation, mathematical calculation, and reading Latin. A woman can possess both practical skills and education." Of course," Marcus said, waving his hand dismissively. "I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I am simply thinking of what will make your life easier. A rancher's wife has many responsibilities." They walked in awkward silence for another block. San Pedro stretched before them, a town caught between its maritime heritage and its agricultural future. Ships bobbed in the harbor to their left, their masts swaying gently in the afternoon breeze, while to their right, false-fronted buildings housed everything from dry goods stores to saloons. The streets were a mix of sailors on leave, ranch hands come to town for supplies, and families going about their daily business. The Ocean View Hotel was a modest 3-story structure painted white with green trim. It stood on a slight rise, offering views of the Pacific from its upper windows. The proprietress, Mrs. Chen, was a Chinese woman who had come to California during the gold rush and had stayed to build a life for herself when her husband died in the mines. She ran a tight ship, keeping her establishment spotlessly clean and serving the best breakfast in town. Mrs. Chen took one look at Winifred flanked by 2 cowboys and raised an eyebrow. "Miss Johnson, I presume?" she asked in accented English. "How did you know?" Winifred asked, surprised. "Mr. Hayes made a reservation 3 days ago," Mrs. Chen said, nodding toward Vincent. "He wanted to make sure you had a comfortable place to stay. The room with the ocean view, as requested." Marcus frowned. "I can pay for a better room at the Grand Pacific." Mrs. Chen's expression cooled. "There is no better room in San Pedro for a woman traveling alone. My hotel is safe, clean, and respectable. Your Grand Pacific caters to men with money but questionable morals." Winifred bit back a smile. "I am sure the ocean view will be perfect, Mrs. Chen. Thank you." As Mrs. Chen led Winifred inside to show her to her room, Vincent and Marcus found themselves alone on the porch. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, his voice slightly lower now without Winifred present to impress. We cannot both court her. We need to settle this like men." "What did you have in mind?" Vincent asked quietly, leaning against the porch railing. "A contest. A test of skill. Whoever wins gets to marry her." Vincent shook his head slowly. "She is not a prize to be won, Collier. She is a woman with her own mind. She should choose who she wants to marry." "And how is she supposed to choose when she does not know us?" Marcus challenged. "At least if we compete, she can see what we are capable of." Vincent considered this. Much as he disliked the idea of reducing courtship to a competition, Marcus had a point. Winifred needed some way to differentiate between them, to see who they truly were beneath their Sunday best and polite words. "What kind of contest?" he asked cautiously. Marcus's eyes lit up. "Ranching skills. Roping, riding, horse-breaking. The things a man needs to survive out here." "And what if she does not care about any of that?" Vincent pointed out. "She was a schoolteacher. Maybe she values other qualities." "Like what?" "The ability to whisper sweet nothings she can barely hear." Marcus's voice dripped with sarcasm. Vincent straightened, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, Collier." Marcus held up his hands. "I am just saying, a wife needs a husband she can depend on. Someone strong, capable, with a voice that commands respect. Or maybe she needs someone who listens more than he talks," Vincent said quietly. "Someone who thinks before he speaks." They stared at each other for a long moment, the air between them crackling with tension. Finally, Marcus turned away with a dismissive wave. "Court her however you want, Hayes, but do not come crying to me when she chooses the better man." He strode off down the street, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust. Vincent watched him go, then sank onto the porch bench with a heavy sigh. What had he gotten himself into? The door opened behind him, and Winifred stepped out. She had removed her traveling hat, and a few strands of auburn hair had escaped their pins to curl around her face. "That was an interesting conversation," she said, settling onto the bench beside him. Vincent's face heated. "You heard that?" Mrs. Chen's windows were open. She folded her hands in her lap, studying them as she spoke. "Mr. Hayes, I need to be honest with you about something." "Please call me Vincent," he said softly. She glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "Vincent, then. And I am Winifred, though my friends call me Winnie." "Winnie," he repeated, and the name felt right on his tongue, intimate and warm. She took a deep breath. "The reason I came to California as a mail-order bride is not a happy one. My father died 2 years ago, leaving debts that consumed everything we had. My mother passed when I was young, so I had no family to turn to. Teaching provided enough to keep me fed and clothed, but barely. When the school board hired a man to replace me at twice my salary, I realized I had no future there. No prospects, no security. Coming west seemed like my only option for a real life." Vincent listened quietly, his eyes on her face as she spoke. He could hear the pain beneath her words, the fear she was trying so hard to mask with practical explanations. "I am not looking for romance," she continued, her voice wavering slightly. "I know that sounds terrible, but I need to be realistic. I need a partnership, a home, security. I need to know that I will not spend the rest of my life alone and destitute." "And what happened to make you afraid of romance?" Vincent asked gently. She looked at him sharply. "What makes you think I am afraid?" "Because hope and fear sound very similar when you are trying to pretend you feel neither." Winifred's eyes widened, and for a moment Vincent thought he had overstepped. But then her expression softened, and she let out a shaky breath. "There was a man back in Pennsylvania, Thomas. He courted me for 2 years, promised to marry me. But when my father died and left nothing but debts, Thomas suddenly remembered he had always planned to move to Boston. He left 3 days after the funeral." "Then he was a fool," Vincent said quietly, but with such conviction that Winifred turned to look at him fully. "You do not know me," she said. "Maybe he was right to leave. Maybe I am not worth staying for. Or maybe he was a coward who only wanted you when it was convenient." Vincent held her gaze. "Real love, real partnership, that is not about convenience. It is about choosing each other when things are hard, not just when they are easy." Tears glittered in Winifred's eyes, but she blinked them back. "You are very different from what I expected. Is that good or bad?" She smiled, truly smiled, and Vincent felt his heart skip. "I am not sure yet. But I appreciate your honesty, and your quiet voice, actually. Marcus's shouting gave me the most terrible headache on the platform." Vincent chuckled softly. "He does tend to make himself heard. And you do the opposite," she observed. "People have to lean in to listen to you." "It is an interesting strategy." "It is not a strategy," Vincent said. "It is just who I am. I never saw the point in filling silence with noise when waiting might serve better." Winifred studied him for a long moment. "My father used to say that a man who talks constantly is usually trying to drown out his own thoughts. A man who is comfortable with silence is comfortable with himself. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "I miss him terribly." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun continued its descent. From somewhere in town, a piano played a melancholy tune, and the salt smell of the ocean mixed with the scent of dust and horses and humanity that defined San Pedro. Finally, Winifred spoke again. "Vincent, I appreciate the room reservation. That was thoughtful, but I need you to understand something. I will not be rushed into a decision. I need time to know both you and Marcus before I choose. And I need to know that whichever man I choose will respect me as an equal partner, not just a housekeeper or a broodmare." "I would expect nothing less," Vincent said. "Take all the time you need. I will be here." She smiled at him again, and Vincent felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the California heat. Over the next week, Vincent and Marcus took turns calling on Winifred, each man determined to prove himself the better choice. Marcus arrived each day with elaborate plans, picnics in hired carriages, dinner at the finest restaurant San Pedro had to offer, even a box of expensive chocolates shipped from San Francisco. He spoke endlessly about his ranch, his plans for expansion, his vision for the future. Winifred listened politely, but Vincent noticed the way her attention sometimes drifted, her eyes glazing over as Marcus launched into yet another monologue about cattle prices and land acquisition. Vincent took a different approach. He invited Winifred to walk with him through the town, pointing out the small details that made San Pedro unique, the way the gulls fought over scraps at the fish market, the ancient oak tree where Spanish missionaries had supposedly held the first mass in the area, the small bookshop run by a former Boston professor who had come west for his health. He asked her questions and actually listened to her answers, discovering that she loved poetry but struggled with Shakespeare, that she could recite the periodic table of elements from memory, that she had once convinced her entire school to put on a production of a Greek play with costumes she had sewn herself. On the third day, Vincent brought her a book he thought she might enjoy, a collection of essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson that he had read multiple times until the pages were soft as cloth. "I thought of you when I read this passage," he said quietly, showing her a paragraph he had marked with a strip of leather. "About self-reliance and trusting your own judgment." Winifred read the passage, her fingers tracing the words. When she looked up at him, her eyes were suspiciously bright. "This is your book," she said. "I cannot take it." "I want you to have it," Vincent said. "Books are meant to be shared." She clutched the volume to her chest. "Thank you. This means more to me than all the chocolates and fancy dinners in the world." "Marcus, observing this exchange from across the street, scowled. The next day, he arrived at the hotel with an entire crate of books, purchased at great expense from the bookshop owner. "I heard you enjoy reading," he announced loudly. "Consider these a gift." But when Winifred opened the crate, she found that Marcus had simply bought the most expensive-looking volumes without any regard for their content. There were agricultural manuals, legal texts, even a medical encyclopedia. Nothing that suggested he had considered her actual interests. "Thank you," she said politely, but Vincent saw the disappointment in her eyes. On the 5th day, Marcus challenged Vincent to a horse race. "Let her see which of us is the better rider," he declared in the middle of the town square, his voice carrying to every corner. "Tomorrow at noon, from here to the old mission and back. The winner gets to take Winifred to the harvest dance next week." Vincent wanted to refuse, to insist again that Winifred was not a prize to be wagered. But he saw the interest spark in her eyes, the way she leaned forward slightly. Maybe she did want to see them compete. Maybe this was her way of evaluating them. "All right," he said quietly. "Tomorrow at noon." Word spread quickly through San Pedro, and by noon the next day, it seemed like half the town had turned out to watch. Vincent arrived on his best horse, a tall bay gelding named Copper with intelligent eyes and a steady temperament. Marcus rode up on a flashy paint stallion that pranced and snorted, tossing its head dramatically. Winifred stood at the starting line with Mrs. Chen, who had closed the hotel for an hour to watch the race. "Gentlemen," Winifred called out, "I appreciate the gesture, but please remember this is a friendly competition, not a battle. I want you both back safe and sound." Marcus grinned broadly. "Do not you worry, Winnie. I will be back before Hayes even makes it to the mission." Vincent said nothing, just stroked Copper's neck and murmured soft reassurances to the horse. The gelding's ears flicked back, listening to his voice. The town sheriff, a grizzled man named Sullivan, fired his pistol in the air to start the race. Both horses leaped forward and they were off. Marcus's stallion was faster initially, its long legs eating up the ground in powerful strides. Marcus whooped and hollered, urging the horse faster. Vincent let Copper find his own pace, trusting the gelding's judgment. The road to the mission was 3 miles of hard-packed dirt with several treacherous sections where erosion had created deep ruts. Marcus maintained his lead for the first mile, but Vincent noticed that the stallion was already lathering, its breathing labored. Marcus was pushing too hard, too fast. Copper, meanwhile, maintained a steady gallop, his breathing even and controlled. As they approached the mission, Marcus's horse stumbled slightly in a rut, throwing Marcus off balance. He caught himself, but the moment of recovery cost him time. Vincent and Copper swept past, and Vincent leaned low over his horse's neck. "Good boy," he murmured. "Steady now." At the mission, they rounded the old bell tower and started back. Now Marcus's stallion was truly struggling, its sides heaving. Marcus kicked and shouted, but the horse had given everything it had. Copper, on the other hand, seemed to find a second wind, his strides lengthening as he sensed home ahead. Vincent won by 3 lengths. The crowd cheered as he crossed the finish line, and Winifred was there, her face flushed with excitement. "That was incredible," she said, reaching up to stroke Copper's nose. "Your horse is beautiful." "He is a good partner," Vincent said, dismounting. His legs were shaky from the hard ride, but he kept his voice calm and even. Knows when to push and when to conserve his energy. Marcus arrived a minute later, his stallion stumbling and exhausted. The crowd's cheers were more muted now, concern for the horse overriding their enthusiasm for the competition. Marcus dismounted roughly, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Your horse needs water and rest," Vincent said quietly, approaching Marcus. "There is a trough over there." "I know how to care for my own damn horse," Marcus snapped, but he led the stallion to the water anyway. Winifred watched this exchange with a thoughtful expression. Later that evening, when Vincent came to collect her for a walk, she brought it up. "You won today," she said as they strolled along the harbor. The sun was setting over the Pacific, turning the water into liquid gold. But you did not gloat. You did not make Marcus feel worse than he already did. "There was no point," Vincent said. "He was angry enough at himself. Besides, winning a race does not make me a better man, it just makes me a faster rider." Winifred stopped walking and turned to face him. "You are not what I expected, Vincent Hayes." "What did you expect?" "I do not know." "Someone more like the men I knew back east. Men who measured their worth in dollars and property and the volume of their voice." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You are different. You measure your worth in entirely different ways." "I measure my worth by my actions," Vincent said softly. "By whether I keep my promises. By whether I treat others with respect. Money and property, those things can be lost. But integrity, that is something you carry with you no matter what." "Did your father teach you that?" Vincent smiled sadly. "No, he taught me the opposite. He was loud and boastful, always chasing the next big opportunity. He died broke and friendless, having alienated everyone who ever cared about him. I decided early on that I would be different." Winifred reached out and took his hand. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through Vincent's entire body. "I am glad you made that choice," she said softly. They walked on in comfortable silence, her hand still in his. Vincent's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she must be able to hear it, but he kept his breathing steady, his pace even. He did not want to rush this moment, did not want to push for more than she was ready to give. "The harvest dance is next week," he said eventually. "Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" Winifred smiled. "I believe you earned that right with your victory today." "Yes, Vincent, I would love to go to the dance with you." Marcus did not take the news well. The next morning he cornered Vincent at the feed store, his face mottled with anger. "You think you have won," he hissed, keeping his voice low for once. "But this is not over. Winifred is just dazzled by your quiet mystery act. Once she sees what real success looks like, once she understands what I can offer her, she will come to her senses." Vincent met his gaze steadily. "If you truly believed that, you would not be so worried." Marcus's jaw clenched. "Stay away from her, Hayes." "That is not your decision to make," Vincent said quietly. "It is hers." For a moment he thought Marcus might actually throw a punch, but then the store owner called out a greeting and Marcus stepped back, forcing a smile. "This is not over," he repeated, then turned and stalked out. Vincent finished his business at the feed store, but Marcus's words lingered in his mind. He was not naive enough to think the other man would simply accept defeat. Marcus was used to getting what he wanted, and his pride would not let him back down gracefully. The week leading up to the harvest dance passed in a blur of preparations. Winifred continued to spend time with both men, though Vincent noticed that her visits with Marcus grew shorter and less frequent. Marcus, sensing he was losing ground, became increasingly desperate. He proposed that Winifred visit his ranch to see the house he was preparing for her. He spoke at length about the wedding he would arrange, the furniture he would buy, the life they would lead together. But Winifred seemed less and less impressed by his grand plans. "He talks about our life together as if I will have no say in it," she confided to Vincent one evening as they sat on the hotel porch. "Everything is already decided in his mind. He has picked out the color of the curtains, the placement of the furniture, even the names of our future children. It is like I am expected to simply step into a role he has written for me." "What do you want?" Vincent asked, She looked at him, surprised by the question. "What do I want?" "Yes. In your ideal life, what would it look like?" Winifred was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she considered. "I want a partnership," she said finally. "Someone who sees me as an equal, who values my opinions and my dreams. I want a home that we build together, not one that is handed to me fully formed. I want children someday, yes, but I also want to continue teaching if I can. I want to feel useful, valued for my mind as well as my domestic skills." She paused, then added softly, "And I want love. Real love, not just security or convenience. I want to matter to someone." Vincent's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. "You matter," he said quietly. "You matter very much." She turned to him, her honey-colored eyes searching his face. "Do I? We have known each other barely 2 weeks." "Time is not always the measure of connection," Vincent said. "I have known Marcus for years, and I understand him less than I understand you after a handful of conversations." Winifred smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You are making this very difficult, Vincent Hayes." "Making what difficult?" "Keeping this practical. Keeping my heart guarded." She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warm evening. "I came here telling myself that love did not matter, that security and partnership would be enough. But you make me want more. You make me hope again, and hope is a dangerous thing." Vincent stood as well, moving to stand beside her at the porch railing. "Why is hope dangerous?" "Because it can be taken away. Because when you hope for something and lose it, the pain is so much worse than never having hoped at all." "But what if you do not lose it?" Vincent asked softly. "What if this time hope is rewarded?" She turned to him, and in the fading light he could see tears glistening on her cheeks. "What if it is not?" Vincent reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Then we will hurt together," he said. "And we will heal together, but I would rather risk pain than never feel anything at all." Winifred closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "You terrify me," she whispered. "Good," Vincent said. "You terrify me too. I think that is how you know it matters." When she opened her eyes again, they were filled with something Vincent had not seen before, not just warmth or affection, but the first stirrings of real, deep feeling. It made his breath catch in his throat. "The dance is tomorrow," she said softly. "I think by the end of the evening I will need to make my choice. It is not fair to keep both of you waiting any longer." Vincent nodded, even as his stomach twisted with anxiety. "Whatever you decide, I will respect it." "I know you will," she said. "That is part of why this is so hard." That night, Vincent barely slept. He lay in his small house, staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow would bring. He had never felt this way about anyone before, this mixture of hope and fear, desire and uncertainty. Winifred had awakened something in him that he had not even known was sleeping. The harvest dance was held in the town's largest barn, which had been cleaned and decorated with lanterns and bunting. The whole town turned out for the event, farmers and ranchers mixing with merchants and sailors in a rare moment of communal celebration. A small band had been assembled: 2 fiddlers, a guitar player, and a man with a battered accordion, and their music filled the space with lively energy. Vincent arrived early, dressed in his best clothes. He had even bought a new shirt for the occasion, a dark blue that matched his eyes. He waited near the entrance, his heart racing every time someone new arrived. Marcus showed up shortly after, dressed even more elaborately than usual. He wore an expensive suit that looked like it had come from San Francisco, his boots polished to a brilliant shine, his hair slicked back with pomade. He nodded curtly at Vincent but did not speak, taking up a position on the opposite side of the entrance. And then Winifred arrived, and both men forgot to breathe. She wore a dress of deep green that brought out the golden tones in her eyes and made her auburn hair shine like copper in the lantern light. The dress was simple but elegant, fitted at the waist and flowing in graceful lines to the floor. She had arranged her hair in a soft style that framed her face, with a few curls left loose around her shoulders. She was, quite simply, the most beautiful thing Vincent had ever seen. Marcus recovered first, striding forward with his hand extended. "Winifred," he boomed, his voice carrying across the entire barn and causing several people to turn and stare. "You look absolutely stunning. Every man here will be jealous that you are with me tonight." Winifred flinched slightly at the volume, and Vincent saw her smile become strained. "Thank you, Marcus," she said politely. "But I believe I am here with Vincent. He won the race, remember?" Marcus's face darkened. "A technicality. Surely you do not mean to hold to such a trivial arrangement when we could make such a handsome couple." "I keep my word," Winifred said firmly, stepping past him to where Vincent waited. Vincent offered her his arm and she took it gratefully. "You look beautiful," he said quietly, leaning down so only she could hear. "Like autumn sunshine." She smiled, and this time it was genuine and warm. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Hayes. Shall we dance?" he asked. "I would love to." The fiddlers struck up a lively reel, and Vincent led Winifred onto the floor. He was not the most graceful dancer, but he knew the steps well enough, and Winifred followed his lead with ease. They moved together naturally, as if they had been dancing together for years rather than minutes from the sidelines. Marcus watched with undisguised fury. After the first dance ended, he pushed through the crowd to cut in. "My turn," he announced, not quite asking permission. Winifred looked to Vincent, who nodded slightly and stepped back. "Of course," she said, though her reluctance was clear. Marcus immediately took her in his arms, holding her too close for propriety. The band started a waltz, and Marcus launched into conversation as they danced. "I have been thinking about our wedding," he said loudly enough that nearby couples could hear. "I think September would be perfect. The weather will be cooling down and the harvest will be in. We could have the ceremony at my ranch, invite everyone in the county. It will be the social event of the season." "Marcus," Winifred said, trying to maintain space between them, "I have not agreed to marry you." "But you will," Marcus said confidently. "Once you see reason. Once you understand that I am offering you everything a woman could want. Security, status, comfort. What can Hayes offer you? A small ranch and a man who can barely make himself heard." "He offers me respect," Winifred said sharply, pulling back to look Marcus in the eye. "He offers me partnership and consideration. He listens when I speak instead of simply waiting for his turn to talk." Marcus's expression hardened. "You think he is so perfect?" "Hayes is hiding things, Winifred. Did you know his father died broke, that he has debts no one knows about, that his ranch is mortgaged to the hilt?" Vincent, who had been watching from nearby, went very still. Those words were not true, but the accusation hung in the air like poison. Winifred stopped dancing entirely. "Is that true, Marcus? Or are you just inventing lies because you are losing?" "Ask him," Marcus said, gesturing toward Vincent. "Ask him about his finances. Ask him if he can really provide for you." The music had stopped, and people were staring now. The whole barn had gone quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. Vincent felt every eye on him as he stepped forward. "My ranch is not mortgaged," he said quietly, but in the silence his voice carried to every corner. "I owe no debts. Everything I have I earned through honest work." "Prove it," Marcus challenged. "I do not need to prove anything to you," Vincent replied, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "But if Winifred wants to see my financial records, she is welcome to them." Winifred shook her head. "I do not need to see anything. I believe you, Vincent." She turned to Marcus, her eyes flashing with anger. "What I do not believe is that you have my best interests at heart, Marcus. This whole evening, all you have done is try to convince me of what I should want, what I should do, who I should marry. You have not once asked me what I actually want." "I know what you want," Marcus insisted. "You want security and a good life. I can give you that. But can you give me respect? Can you give me partnership? Can you listen to me without talking over me?" She took a step back, straightening her shoulders. "I have made my decision, Marcus. I am choosing Vincent." The barn erupted in whispers and gasps. Marcus's face went through a series of expressions: shock, denial, and finally rage. "You are making a mistake," he said harshly. "You will regret this." "The only thing I regret is not making this choice sooner," Winifred replied. She held out her hand to Vincent. "Take me home, please." Vincent took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Together they walked through the crowd and out into the night, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. Outside, the air was cool and smelled of the ocean. Stars blazed overhead in a display that never ceased to amaze Vincent, even after years of living under these California skies. They walked in silence for a few minutes, both processing what had just happened. "I am sorry," Vincent said finally. "I did not mean for your choice to be forced like that." "You did not force anything," Winifred replied. "Marcus did that all on his own, and honestly, I am glad. I should have made the decision days ago. I was just afraid." "Afraid of what?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Afraid of this feeling," she said softly. "Afraid of caring this much after such a short time. Afraid that I might be making another mistake, choosing with my heart instead of my head." Vincent took both her hands in his. "What does your heart tell you? That you are a good man. That you see me as a person, not just a potential wife. That when I am with you, I feel safe and valued and understood." She paused, then added in a whisper, "That I could love you if I let myself." Vincent's heart felt like it might burst from his chest. "And what does your head tell you?" "That I barely know you. That 2 weeks is not enough time to make such an important decision. That I should be practical and logical and careful." "Your head is right," Vincent said quietly. 2 weeks is not very long. We have a lot to learn about each other." "But Winnie, I feel the same way you do, and I am willing to take the risk if you are. We can take our time, court properly. There is no rush." "But I came here to marry," Winifred said. "I cannot stay at the hotel indefinitely. Mrs. Chen has been kind, but I am running out of money." Vincent considered this. "Then marry me," he said softly. "Not because you have to, but because you want to. And know that if you change your mind tomorrow or next week or next year, I will not hold you to anything. I want you to be happy, Winnie. That is all I want." Tears spilled down her cheeks, glittering in the starlight. "You are making it very hard not to love you." "Good," Vincent said, echoing her words from earlier. "Because I think I am already halfway in love with you." She laughed through her tears, and then suddenly she was in his arms, her face buried against his chest. Vincent held her carefully, as if she were something precious and fragile that might break. He could feel her trembling, feel the rapid beat of her heart against his. "Yes," she whispered into his shirt. "Yes, I will marry you, Vincent Hayes, not because I have to, but because I want to." Vincent pulled back just enough to see her face, to make sure she was certain. What he saw there took his breath away: joy and hope and the beginning of love, all mixed together in her honey-colored eyes. He kissed her then, gently and carefully, a promise of things to come. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt as if to anchor herself. It was sweet and tender and perfect, and when they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "When?" Winifred asked. "When should we marry?" "Whenever you are ready," Vincent said. "Tomorrow, next week, next month, I will wait as long as you need." She smiled. "How about Saturday?" That gives us 4 days to make arrangements, not too rushed, but not so long that I have time to panic and change my mind." Vincent laughed softly. "Saturday it is." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, making quiet plans and sharing hopes for their future. Mrs. Chen was waiting on the porch when they arrived, a knowing smile on her face. "So," she said, "I take it you two have reached an understanding. We are getting married on Saturday," Winifred announced, her face glowing with happiness. "I hope you will come to the wedding, Mrs. Chen." "You have been so kind to me." Mrs. Chen's smile widened. "I would not miss it, and I know the perfect dress for you to borrow. Come inside, let me show you." The next 4 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Word of the engagement spread through San Pedro like wildfire, and to Vincent's surprise, the whole town seemed invested in making the wedding special. The owner of the dry goods store donated fabric for decorations. The baker offered to make a cake at cost. Even the minister offered to waive his fee, saying that any couple who had caused such drama at the harvest dance deserved a proper church wedding. Marcus disappeared from town the day after the dance. Some said he had returned to his ranch to lick his wounds. Others claimed he had gone to San Francisco to find another bride. Vincent did not much care either way. He was too focused on the future to waste time worrying about the past. On Saturday morning, Vincent woke before dawn, too nervous and excited to sleep. He dressed carefully in a new suit he had purchased for the occasion, fumbling with the collar buttons in his nervousness. He had never been married before, had never really expected to be. The idea that in a few hours Winifred would be his wife seemed too good to be true. The wedding was set for 10 o'clock at the small church on the hill overlooking the harbor. Vincent arrived an hour early, unable to bear waiting at home any longer. He stood at the altar, staring at the simple wooden cross on the wall, and prayed that he would be worthy of the gift he was receiving. People began to arrive in small groups. His ranch hands came, cleaned up and wearing their Sunday best. Mrs. Chen arrived with several other business owners from town. Sheriff Sullivan showed up with his wife. Even the cantankerous old bookshop owner made an appearance, presenting Vincent with a slim volume of poetry. "For your bride," he said gruffly. "Every woman deserves poetry on her wedding day." And then the church doors opened, and Winifred walked in on the arm of Dr. Morrison, the town physician who had agreed to give her away. She wore a simple dress of cream-colored lace that Mrs. Chen had indeed lent her, with flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden woven into her hair. She was so beautiful that Vincent felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. She walked toward him slowly, her gaze locked on his face. When she reached the altar, Dr. Morrison placed her hand in Vincent's and stepped back. "Hello," Winifred whispered, smiling up at him. "Hello," Vincent replied softly. "You look like a dream." The minister cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Vincent barely heard the words, too focused on Winifred's face, on the way her eyes sparkled with happiness, on the small smile that played at her lips. When it came time for the vows, he spoke as clearly and quietly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I, Vincent Hayes, take you, Winifred Johnson, to be my wife. I promise to respect you, to listen to you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to work every day to deserve the gift of your love and trust. I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is hard. And I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." Winifred's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her own vows, but her words were clear. "I, Winifred Johnson, take you, Vincent Hayes, to be my husband. I promise to respect you, to support you, to be your partner in all things. I promise to trust you with my heart, even when that frightens me. I promise to be honest with you, to build a life with you, and to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Vincent kissed his bride there in the small church overlooking the Pacific, sealing their promises with tenderness and joy. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel, where Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast. There was music and dancing and laughter. People told stories and offered toasts. It was simple and unpretentious and perfect. As evening approached, Vincent and Winifred slipped away from the party. They rode out to Vincent's ranch in his wagon, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. Winifred sat close beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her head occasionally leaning against his shoulder. "Are you nervous?" Vincent asked softly as they approached his house. "A little," she admitted. "This is all so new. A new place, a new name, a new life." "We will figure it out together," Vincent promised. "And if you hate the house, we can change things. It is your home now, too." But when they arrived and Vincent helped her down from the wagon, Winifred looked around with wonder rather than disappointment. The house was small but well built, with a porch that wrapped around two sides and windows that overlooked the valley. Inside, everything was simple but clean, the furniture handmade but sturdy. "I love it," Winifred said, turning in a slow circle in the main room. "I love that it is not fancy or pretentious. I love that it feels like you." Vincent lit the lamps, casting warm light through the space. "There are things we will need," he said. "More furniture, more dishes, curtains for the windows. I want you to choose those things, make this place feel like ours." Winifred smiled and walked over to the bookshelf that dominated one wall. She trailed her fingers over the spines of his books. "You have wonderful taste in literature," she said. "Though I notice you have no poetry." "I do now," Vincent said, pulling out the slim volume the bookshop owner had given him. "For you." She took the book, opening it to find an inscription on the first page. "To Winifred, who deserves all the poetry in the world, welcome to San Pedro," her eyes filled with tears. "This town," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "These people. They have been so kind to me, even though I am a stranger." "You are not a stranger anymore," Vincent said softly. "You are one of us now. You are home." They spent their first night as husband and wife talking, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for their future. Vincent learned about Winifred's childhood in Pennsylvania, the long winters and the summers spent reading under an old apple tree. She learned about his years working his father's ranch, trying to hold things together even as his father's wild schemes tore them apart. They talked about the books they loved, the places they wanted to see someday, the children they hoped to have. And when words finally gave way to touch, to the tentative exploration of new intimacy, it was gentle and sweet, filled with whispered endearments and soft laughter. They learned each other slowly, with patience and care, building trust with every kiss and caress. Afterward, lying in each other's arms in the darkness, Winifred whispered, "I am not afraid anymore." "What changed?" Vincent asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "You did. Or rather, you showed me that not all men are like Thomas. Not all promises are empty. Some people stay." "I am staying," Vincent said firmly. "For good." The first weeks of their marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Winifred had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings, the constant work, the unpredictable challenges. Vincent had to adjust to sharing his space, to considering another person in every decision, to being vulnerable with his thoughts and feelings. But they worked at it together, communicating through the awkward moments and misunderstandings. When Winifred accidentally let the chickens into the vegetable garden, they laughed about it and built a better fence together. When Vincent forgot to mention he had invited his ranch hands for dinner, leaving Winifred scrambling to prepare enough food, he apologized and helped with the cooking. Slowly, day by day, they built a life together, Winifred started teaching again, gathering the ranch children and those from neighboring properties for lessons twice a week. She set up a small schoolroom in the barn, and Vincent helped her build desks and a blackboard. The children adored her, and watching her work with them, seeing the patience and passion she brought to teaching, made Vincent fall even more deeply in love with her. For her part, Winifred discovered that she loved ranch life more than she had expected. She loved the wide open spaces, the smell of hay and horses, the satisfaction of physical work. She learned to ride well, often accompanying Vincent when he checked on the cattle or mended fences. She learned to recognize the signs of illness in animals, to assist with difficult births, to predict weather by watching the clouds roll in from the ocean. And through it all, their bond deepened. The physical attraction that had sparked between them grew into something richer and more complex, a true partnership built on respect, trust, and genuine affection. 3 months after their wedding, as autumn painted the California hills in shades of gold and amber, Winifred missed her monthly courses. She waited another week, afraid to hope, before finally going to see Dr. Morrison. When she returned home that afternoon, Vincent was in the barn repairing a saddle. She stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the afternoon sun, and he looked up to see tears streaming down her face. He dropped the saddle immediately and rushed to her side. "What is wrong? What happened?" "Nothing is wrong," she said through her tears. "Vincent, I am with child." He stared at her for a long moment, his mind struggling to process the words, and then joy, pure and overwhelming, swept through him. He let out a whoop of delight, probably the loudest sound Winifred had ever heard him make, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she was laughing and crying at the same time. "We are having a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, even though the answer was written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to describe it," Vincent said. He set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "Are you happy? Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down?" "Should you be working so hard at the school?" Winifred laughed at his sudden nervousness. "I am fine, Vincent. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am healthy and strong, and Dr. Morrison says everything looks good." But Vincent could not help but worry. Over the following months, he became almost comically protective, insisting that Winifred rest more, eat more, avoid any activity that might be strenuous. She bore his hovering with good humor, gently reminding him that pregnancy was not an illness. As her belly grew, they spent long evenings planning for their child. They talked about names, about how they would raise their son or daughter, about the values they wanted to instill. Vincent built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with intricate designs of horses and stars. Winifred sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches precise and even. The whole town watched Winifred's pregnancy with interest. Mrs. Chen stopped by regularly with food and advice. The ranch wives shared their own experiences and offered to help when the time came. Even the crusty old bookshop owner brought by a stack of children's books, declaring that it was never too early to start a proper library. One afternoon in late spring, about 6 months into Winifred's pregnancy, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Vincent was working in the corral when he saw the rider approach a well-dressed man on a fine horse, picking his way carefully up the drive. As the man drew closer, Vincent's stomach sank. It was Marcus Collier. Vincent had not seen Marcus since the night of the harvest dance. He had heard that Marcus had indeed gone to San Francisco and returned with a bride of his own, a woman named Catherine from a wealthy family. Apparently, that marriage had lasted all of 3 months before Catherine had run back to San Francisco, complaining about the isolation and primitive conditions of ranch life. Marcus dismounted, and Vincent could see the changes the past months had wrought. He looked older, harder, with new lines around his eyes and mouth. His clothes were as expensive as ever, but they hung on him differently, as if he had lost weight. "Hayes," Marcus said, his voice lacking its former booming confidence. "Collier," Vincent replied carefully. "What brings you here?" Marcus looked down at his boots, scuffing at the dirt. "I came to apologize," he said quietly, "for how I acted, for the things I said. I was angry and hurt, and I behaved badly." Vincent studied him for a long moment. "I appreciate that," he said finally. "It takes courage to admit when you are wrong." "I was wrong about a lot of things," Marcus continued. "I thought I knew what I wanted, what would make me happy. I thought if I just had the biggest ranch, the finest house, the most beautiful wife, that would be enough." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out none of that matters if you cannot actually connect with another human being. Is that what happened with Catherine? She took one look at my ranch and decided she had made a terrible mistake. I tried to convince her to stay, promised her trips to San Francisco, a house in town, anything she wanted. But she did not want things. She wanted conversation, companionship, someone who saw her as more than a trophy." He met Vincent's eyes. "She wanted what you give Winifred." Vincent did not know what to say to that. Before he could formulate a response, Winifred emerged from the house, her hand on her swollen belly. She stopped when she saw Marcus, uncertainty crossing her face. Marcus removed his hat. "Mrs. Hayes," he said respectfully, "you look well. Congratulations on your happy news." "Thank you, Marcus," Winifred said carefully. She moved to stand beside Vincent, and he automatically put his arm around her shoulders. "I was just apologizing to your husband for my behavior," Marcus continued. "I hope you can forgive me as well. I said and did some terrible things, and you both deserved better." Winifred studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I forgive you, Marcus, and I hope you find what you are looking for." "I hope so too," Marcus said. He put his hat back on and mounted his horse. "For what it is worth, I think you chose the right man. Hayes is a good person, better than me. I hope you will be very happy together." "We already are," Winifred said softly, leaning into Vincent's side. Marcus nodded, touched his hat in farewell, and rode away. Vincent and Winifred stood watching until he disappeared over the hill. "That was unexpected," Winifred said. "But good," Vincent replied. "Forgiveness is important. Holding on to anger only hurts the person carrying it." Winifred looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "Have I told you today that I love you?" "Not in the last hour," Vincent said with a smile. "I love you, Vincent Hayes, more than I ever thought possible. And I love you, Winnie, more than words can express." 2 months later, on a warm June evening, Winifred went into labor. It started slowly, with mild pains that gradually increased in intensity. Vincent sent one of the ranch hands racing to fetch Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Chen, while he stayed by Winifred's side, holding her hand and trying not to panic. The labor was long and difficult. Winifred was brave and strong, but Vincent could see the toll it took on her. He whispered encouragement, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, and tried to be the steady presence she needed, even as his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. Finally, as dawn broke over the California hills, their son was born. Vincent heard the baby's first cry and felt tears stream down his face. Dr. Morrison cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him carefully in Winifred's arms. "You have a healthy boy," the doctor said with a smile. Vincent looked down at his wife and son, and his heart felt so full he thought it might burst. The baby was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would surely be his mother's honey color. He was perfect. "Hello, little one," Winifred whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Welcome to the world." "What should we name him?" Vincent asked softly. They had discussed names for months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Winifred smiled. "William," she said. "After my father. William Vincent Hayes." "William," Vincent repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, William. I am your father, and I promise to do everything in my power to be worthy of you." The baby yawned, showing pink gums, and both parents laughed through their tears. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a good baby, healthy and alert, but he still demanded constant attention. Winifred recovered slowly from the birth, and Vincent took on more of the household duties to give her time to rest and heal. They took turns walking the floor with William when he cried in the night. They marveled together over every tiny change: his first smile, the way his eyes followed movement, the strong grip of his miniature fingers. They were tired and overwhelmed and happier than either had ever been. Mrs. Chen and the other ranch wives stopped by regularly with food and advice. The community that had welcomed Winifred as a bride now embraced her as a mother, sharing the wisdom of their own experiences and offering help whenever it was needed. As William grew, Vincent and Winifred's relationship deepened even further. The challenges of parenthood brought them closer together, teaching them to work as an even more cohesive team. They learned to communicate in the shorthand of long married couples, understanding each other's needs with a glance. When William was 6 months old, Winifred returned to teaching, bringing the baby with her to the schoolroom. The older children delighted in helping care for him, taking turns rocking him when he fussed and competing to make him smile. Vincent would sometimes stand in the barn doorway, watching his wife teach with their son sleeping in a basket nearby, and feel overwhelmed by gratitude. A year and a half ago, he had been alone, wondering if he would ever find someone to share his life with. Now he had a wife he loved more than breathing, a son who made every day an adventure, and a home filled with laughter and warmth. Life was not perfect, of course. There were hard times: a drought that nearly killed their herd, a sickness that swept through the town, arguments and misunderstandings that came with any marriage. But they faced these challenges together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. 2 years after William's birth, Winifred became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she barely slowed down, chasing after their active toddler while her belly grew. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret after Vincent's mother, arrived on a crisp autumn morning, her birth quick and uncomplicated. If William had stolen their hearts, Margaret utterly destroyed any resistance they might have had left. She was a tiny thing with auburn curls like her mother and her father's storm-gray eyes. She smiled constantly, charming everyone she met, and her laugh was like bells ringing. William, at 2 years old, was initially suspicious of this small interloper who demanded so much of his parents' attention. But when Margaret wrapped her tiny hand around his finger for the first time, he was lost. He became her fierce protector, always watching out for his little sister. As their children grew, Vincent and Winifred worked hard to instill the values they held dear. They taught William and Margaret to be honest, to work hard, to treat others with respect regardless of their station in life. They taught them to love learning, filling the house with books and encouraging questions. They taught them that true strength came not from the volume of one's voice, but from the character of one's actions. The ranch prospered under Vincent and Winifred's joint management. Winifred had a head for numbers and took over the bookkeeping, finding efficiencies that Vincent had missed. She also suggested diversifying their holdings, raising both cattle and horses rather than focusing on just one. Her ideas proved sound, and within a few years, They were able to expand their land and hire more help. But success never changed them fundamentally. They remained the same people they had been, hardworking, honest, connected to their community. Their home was always open to neighbors in need. Winifred continued teaching, now in a proper schoolhouse that the town had built with funds raised by Vincent and other ranchers. Vincent served on the town council, using his quiet but persuasive voice to advocate for improvements that would benefit everyone. Years passed in a blur of seasons. Children grew. The ranch expanded. San Pedro evolved from a rough port town into a proper community with schools and churches and families putting down roots. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Winifred back to the spot where he had first kissed her, that night after the harvest dance when she had chosen him. They left the children with Mrs. Chen, who was now as much family as friend, and rode out to watch the sunset over the Pacific. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked as they sat together on a blanket, his arm around her shoulders. "Choosing me, coming to California." Winifred looked at him as if he had lost his mind. "Regret, Vincent, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. This life we have built together, our children, our home, it is beyond anything I dared to dream about when I stepped off that train. Even though I talk so quietly, you have to lean in to hear me," he teased. She laughed. "Especially because of that. Your quiet voice taught me to listen, really listen. It taught me that the most important things do not need to be shouted." She turned to face him fully. "Do you know what I love most about your voice?" "What?" "That it is only for the people you care about. You do not waste words on empty talk or idle boasting. When you speak, it matters. And when you speak to me, I know it comes from your heart." Vincent kissed her then, deep and slow, pouring 10 years of love and devotion into that single gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I love you," he said softly. "More now than the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." "You are getting poetic in your old age," Winifred teased. She was 33 now, he 36, and both carried the marks of their years' laugh lines around their eyes, strands of silver in their hair, calluses on their hands. But to Vincent, she was even more beautiful than the nervous bride who had stepped off the train. "You deserve poetry," Vincent said. "You have always deserved poetry." They sat watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold. The waves crashed against the shore below them, steady and eternal, and Vincent thought about how much his life had changed since that day at the depot. He thought about Marcus, whom they occasionally saw in town. He had eventually remarried, a widow with 3 children of her own, and seemed finally to have found some measure of contentment. He and Vincent were not friends exactly, but they nodded cordially when their paths crossed, and that was enough. He thought about Winifred's first letters, the careful way she had described herself and her hopes for the future. She had been looking for security and partnership, afraid to hope for love. Now she had all 3, and she gave as much as she received. Most of all, he thought about the moment when she had chosen him, there at the harvest dance with the whole town watching. She had chosen his quiet voice over Marcus's booming confidence, chosen substance over flash, chosen a partnership built on mutual respect over a comfortable arrangement. That choice had changed both their lives. "What are you thinking about?" Winifred asked, always attuned to his moods. "About how lucky I am," Vincent said simply. "About how one decision, one moment can change everything. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had chosen differently?" She asked. "If I had married Marcus instead," Vincent considered this. "I think you would have been miserable," he said honestly. "And I think Marcus would have been too. He needed someone different from what you could give him, and you needed someone who saw you for who you really are. And you see me," Winifred said softly. "You always have." "I see you," Vincent confirmed, "and I love everything I see." They rode back to the ranch as twilight fell, their horses walking side by side. When they arrived home, they found William and Margaret asleep in Mrs. Chen's guest room, and they carried their children back to their own beds, tucking them in with gentle kisses. Later, lying in bed with Winifred in his arms, Vincent reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had not been easy or simple. There had been moments of doubt and fear, obstacles that had seemed insurmountable. But they had faced everything together, and their love had not just survived, it had flourished. "Vincent," Winifred whispered in the darkness. "Yes. Thank you for waiting for me at that depot. Thank you for being patient and quiet and exactly who you are. Thank you for showing me that love is not just about grand gestures and loud declarations. Sometimes it is about the quiet moments, the steady presence, the voice that makes you lean in to listen." Vincent tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for choosing me," he whispered back, "for taking a chance on a quiet cowboy with more hope than sense." She laughed softly. "We both took a chance, and look how it turned out." The years continued to roll by like the waves on the California shore. William grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his father's quiet strength and his mother's love of learning. He went away to university in San Francisco, studying agricultural science, then returned to help run the ranch with new ideas about sustainable practices and soil management. Margaret proved to be a force of nature, combining her mother's intelligence with her father's determination. She became a teacher like Winifred, but she also advocated for women's rights and better working conditions for ranch hands. She was loud where her father was quiet, but she had inherited his ability to make people listen when she spoke. Vincent and Winifred aged gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They took joy in watching their children grow and eventually start families of their own. William married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they gave Vincent and Winifred 3 grandchildren who kept them constantly entertained. Margaret married a lawyer who shared her passion for social justice, and they had twin girls who were as spirited as their mother. The ranch house expanded to accommodate the growing family. Holidays became large, noisy affairs with multiple generations gathered around the table. Vincent would sit at the head of that table, Winifred at his side, and marvel at the family they had created together. He never forgot that moment at the depot, though that instant when his life could have gone in an entirely different direction. Sometimes, watching Winifred across a crowded room, he would catch her eye and remember. She would smile, and he would know she was remembering too. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered to celebrate. William had arranged a party at the ranch, with friends and neighbors coming from miles around. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, all the things that made life worth living. As the evening wound down and the younger children were taken home to bed, Vincent found Winifred standing on the porch, looking out at the land they had built their life on. He came to stand beside her, taking her hand in his. 30 years, she said wonderingly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Vincent replied. His voice was still quiet, but now it carried the weight of years and experience. The lines on his face were deep, his hair more silver than dark, but his eyes held the same steady love they always had. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Winifred asked. "On Mrs. Chen's porch?" "I said a lot of things that night. You said that real love was about choosing each other when things were hard, not just when they were easy." She turned to face him. "You were right. These 30 years have not always been easy. We have faced drought and disease, financial troubles and family challenges, but we have faced them together, and I have never once regretted my choice." "Neither have I," Vincent said, He cupped her face in his work-worn hands. "You are my heart, Winnie. You always have been." They kissed there in the moonlight, surrounded by the sounds of their family inside the house, grandchildren playing, children laughing, friends talking. It was the sound of a life well lived, a love well chosen. As they stood there together, Vincent thought about the young cowboy he had been, standing alone at that depot, hoping that the woman stepping off the train would be someone he could build a life with. He had gotten so much more than he had hoped for. Winifred had not just been a bride, she had been a partner, a friend, a lover, a mother to his children and the great love of his life, and it had all started because she had chosen the cowboy with the quieter voice. "What are you smiling about?" Winifred asked. "Just thinking about that day at the depot," Vincent said. "About how you and Marcus and I all stood there, and you had to choose between us." "There was never really a choice," Winifred said. "Marcus was all noise and bluster, making grand promises without any substance behind them. But you, Vincent Hayes, you made me lean in to listen. And when I did, I heard truth and kindness and a depth of character that Marcus could never match." "He was not a bad person," Vincent said fairly, "just the wrong person for you, and you were exactly the right person." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about the woman I was when I stepped off that train. So scared and uncertain, trying to be practical when my heart was breaking. I thought love was something that happened to other people, that I would have to settle for security and companionship. And now I know that love is not just possible, it is everything. It is the foundation we built our life on. It is what gets us through the hard times and makes the good times even better. It is choosing each other every single day, even when it would be easier not to." Vincent pulled her close, his heart full to bursting. "I choose you," he whispered. "Every day, every moment, I choose you." "And I choose you," Winifred whispered back. "Always." Inside the house, someone called for them to come back and have cake. Their children and grandchildren were waiting, ready to celebrate 3 decades of marriage that had started with a choice at a train depot and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Hand in hand, Vincent and Winifred walked back inside to their family. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. They had built a good life together, raised good children, created a home filled with love and laughter. And it had all begun because Winifred Johnson had stepped off a train in San Pedro, California, in 1882, and chosen to listen to the cowboy with the quieter voice. Years later, when their grandchildren asked about how they met, Vincent and Winifred would tell the story together, finishing each other's sentences and sharing knowing glances. They would talk about the mix-up with the marriage broker, about Marcus's loud confidence and Vincent's quiet steadiness, about the harvest dance and the choice that had changed everything. "But how did you know grandfather was the right one?" the grandchildren would ask. And Winifred would smile, taking Vincent's hand in hers. "Because he made me want to listen," she would say. "Because his quiet voice promised truth and respect and partnership. Because when I looked at him, I saw a man who would keep his promises, who would work beside me rather than expect me to follow behind him, who would love me for who I was rather than what I could do for him. And because," Vincent would add softly, "she was brave enough to choose with her heart instead of her head. She was brave enough to hope again, even when hope was scary." The story would become family legend, passed down through generations. The tale of 2 cowboys waiting at the depot for the same bride, and how she chose the one with the quieter voice. It became a lesson about looking beneath surface appearances, about the value of listening, about choosing substance over flash. But for Vincent and Winifred, it was simply their story. The beginning of a love that had sustained them through 3 decades of marriage, and would continue to sustain them for the decades yet to come. As they grew older together, their love did not diminish but transformed. It became deeper, richer, tempered by years of shared experience. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate entire conversations with a single glance. They had weathered storms together, both literal and metaphorical, and had emerged stronger on the other side. Vincent retired from active ranch management when he turned 60, turning the day-to-day operations over to William while he focused on mentoring his grandchildren and serving on the town council. Winifred continued teaching until she was 65, finally retiring when her eyesight began to fail, and she found it harder to read the small text in books. They spent their retirement years traveling, visiting places they had always dreamed of seeing. They went to San Francisco and stayed in a fine hotel, attending the opera and walking through museums. They traveled east to Pennsylvania, so Winifred could show Vincent where she had grown up, visiting her father's grave and the school where she had taught. But they always returned to San Pedro, to the ranch and the family they had built there. It was their home, the place where their love had taken root and flourished. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town turned out to celebrate. The mayor declared it Vincent and Winifred Hayes Day, and there was a parade and speeches and a party that lasted well into the night. Vincent and Winifred sat in places of honor, watching as their children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren danced and celebrated. 50 years, Vincent said wonderingly, his voice even quieter now with age but still carrying that same steady certainty. Half a century. And I would do it all again, Winifred said. Her hair was snow-white now, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived, but her honey-colored eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and warmth they had held when she first stepped off that train. Even knowing all the hard times we faced, Vincent asked. Especially knowing that, Winifred said firmly, because the hard times taught us how strong we are together. They proved that our love was real and lasting, not just a pretty feeling that would fade with the first difficulty. Vincent leaned over and kissed her, not caring that the whole town was watching. I love you, Winnie Hayes. I have loved you from the moment you chose to listen to my quiet voice instead of Marcus's loud one. And I love you, Vincent Hayes. Thank you for a lifetime of quiet strength, steady love, and perfect partnership. As the party continued around them, they sat together hand in hand, watching their legacy unfold before them. Their children had become respected members of the community, carrying on the values Vincent and Winifred had instilled in them. Their grandchildren were growing into fine young people, some following in their grandparents' footsteps and others forging their own paths. The ranch prospered, the school thrived, the town grew and flourished. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of that night when Winifred had chosen Vincent at the harvest dance. They had built not just a marriage but a foundation that would support generations to come. The moon rose over the Pacific as it had done for countless nights, casting silver light across the water. Vincent and Winifred sat together, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill, and watched the waves roll in. They did not need to speak. After 50 years of marriage, silence between them was as comfortable as conversation. But finally, as the party wound down and people began to head home, Winifred spoke. Do you think we made a difference, Vincent, in the grand scheme of things? Vincent considered the question seriously, as he considered everything. I think we made a difference to each other, he said finally. We made a difference to our children and our grandchildren. We made a difference in this town, in the lives we touched. Maybe that is all anyone can hope for: to love well, to raise good people, to leave the world a little better than we found it. Then we succeeded, Winifred said with satisfaction. "We loved well. We raised good people, and this little corner of the world is better because we were in it." They sat in peaceful silence for a few more minutes. Then Vincent stood and offered his hand to his wife. "Come on, Mrs. Hayes. Let us go home." Winifred took his hand and let him help her to her feet. Together they walked back to their house, their steps slower now but still in perfect sync. The ranch spread around them, familiar and beloved, the home they had built together from dreams and hard work and unwavering love. As they reached their bedroom, Winifred paused to look at the photograph on their dresser, a picture taken on their wedding day, 50 years ago. They looked so young in the photograph, almost impossibly young, full of hope and nervous excitement. But the love in their eyes was the same love that still existed between them now, just deepened and strengthened by half a century of living it. "We were just babies," Winifred said softly. "We were brave," Vincent corrected. "Taking a chance on each other, building a life from nothing but faith and determination. The best decision I ever made," Winifred said, turning to embrace him. "The best decision we both made," Vincent replied, holding her close. They went to bed that night wrapped in each other's arms, just as they had done for 50 years. And if their embrace was gentler now, their bodies shaped by time and age, the love behind it was no less powerful. Vincent and Winifred Hayes lived another decade together, their love sustaining them even as their bodies began to fail. They faced each challenge as they had faced everything else together, with grace and courage and unwavering support for each other. When Vincent passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 82, Winifred was there beside him, holding his hand. Her heart broke, but it did not shatter. How could it when it held 60 years of beautiful memories, when it had been shaped by a love so deep and true? Winifred lived another 3 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to tell the story of how she met Vincent, keeping his memory alive with every retelling. And when her own time came, she went peacefully, a smile on her face, ready to join her beloved husband again. They were buried side by side on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, with matching headstones that simply read. Vincent Hayes, he spoke quietly but was heard clearly, and Winifred Hayes, she listened with her heart. Their story became part of San Pedro's history, a testament to the power of choosing wisely, listening carefully, and loving deeply. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations. The school continued to educate children, its foundation built on Winifred's dedication to learning. The town prospered, shaped in part by the values Vincent and Winifred had championed. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the Pacific and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, people swore they could still feel the presence of the two souls who had loved each other so well for so long. Vincent's quiet strength and Winifred's bright warmth, together even in death as they had been in life. The depot where they first met eventually became a historical landmark, with a plaque telling the story of the mail-order bride who had to choose between two cowboys. Tour guides would point out the spot where Vincent and Marcus had stood, waiting, where Winifred had stepped off the train and been confronted with an impossible choice. She chose the one with the quieter voice, the guides would say. And in doing so, she built a love story for the ages. Because in the end, that was the lesson of Vincent and Winifred Hayes. That true love is not about grand gestures or loud declarations. It is about quiet strength and steady devotion. It is about choosing each other every day through all the challenges and joys that life brings. It is about building something lasting from faith and hope and love. Two cowboys had waited at the depot for the same bride. She had picked the one with the quieter voice. And in that choice, in that single moment of brave decision, she had found not just a husband but a partner, not just a marriage but a love story that would endure for 60 years and beyond. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that bore their name, in the town they had helped build, in the countless lives they had touched with their kindness and integrity. But most of all, it lived on in the story itself, the tale of how sometimes the quietest voice carries the most important message, how true love is built on respect and partnership and choosing each other again and again. And in San Pedro, California, where the Pacific meets the shore and the hills roll golden in the summer sun, people still remember Vincent and Winifred Hayes. They remember the love that started at a train depot and lasted a lifetime. They remember that the best choices are sometimes the hardest ones, that listening can be more important than speaking, and that quiet voices can echo through the generations. That is the story of two cowboys who waited at the depot for the same bride, and how she picked the one with the quieter voice. It is a story of love and choice, of courage and commitment, of a life built together one quiet word at a time. And it is a story that proves that happily ever after is not just for fairy tales sometimes. With luck and love and a willingness to truly listen, it can be real.